The storage room door slammed shut with a metallic echo that would haunt Warren High for years to come. 3 varsity football players thought they'd cornered their easiest target, the quiet transfer student who ate lunch alone and flinched at loud noises. But in exactly 7 minutes, Ebony Stone would transform from victim to legend, leaving her attackers begging for mercy on the cold concrete floor. What they didn't know was that beneath her trembling exterior lived 8 years of Krav Maga training and a promise she'd made at her father's grave. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Ebony Stone pressed her back against the rusted lockers, counting her breaths the way her therapist had taught her. 1, 2, 3, 4. The November chill seeped through the thin walls of Warren High, but sweat still beaded on her forehead as she watched Mason Clark and his crew swagger down the hallway. They moved like predators, shoulders rolling with practiced intimidation. Letterman jackets announced their untouchable status to anyone foolish enough to challenge the social hierarchy. She'd been at the school for exactly 17 days. 17 days of keeping her head down, speaking only when called upon, eating lunch in the library to avoid the cafeteria's brutal social dynamics. Her mother had begged her to try, just this once, to have a normal senior year. No incidents, no trouble, just graduate and move on. After what happened at her last school, after the lawsuit, the media attention, and her father's death, Ebony had promised to become invisible. But invisibility, she was learning, could make you a target just as easily as standing out. "Hey, Mouse!" Mason called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of casual cruelty that only came from years of unchecked power. The nickname had started on her 3rd day, when she'd squeaked in surprise after he'd slammed a textbook next to her head. The entire AP chemistry class had laughed. Even Mrs. Parker had merely sighed and continued writing equations on the board. Ebony didn't respond. She'd learned that engagement only encouraged them. Instead, she clutched her books tighter and quickened her pace toward the east stairwell. If she could make it to the 2nd floor, she'd be safe. The art wing was Mrs. Ramirez's domain, and even Mason wouldn't risk disrupting the one teacher who had the principal's ear. "I'm talking to you," Mason's voice sharpened. Footsteps quickened behind her. 3 sets. He rarely traveled without backup. Today, it was Dylan Ward and Aaron Reed, both defensive linemen who could bench press twice their body weight and weren't shy about reminding everyone of that fact. Ebony's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she turned the corner. The stairwell door was 20 feet away. 15. 10. A hand slammed against the wall in front of her, blocking her path. Dylan's arm was thick as a tree trunk, covered in tribal tattoos his parents definitely didn't know about. He grinned down at her, all teeth and malice. "Where are you running to, Mouse?" he asked, his breath reeking of energy drinks and arrogance. Ebony stepped back, only to bump into Aaron. The books tumbled from her arms, scattering across the floor. Her copy of The Great Gatsby landed spine up, pages splaying like broken wings. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. "Please," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I need to get to class." Mason laughed, the sound echoing off the empty hallway walls. "Class doesn't start for another 15 minutes. Besides, we need to talk about that little stunt you pulled yesterday." Yesterday, Ebony's stomach clenched. She'd made the mistake of scoring higher than Mason on the calculus midterm. Mrs. Clark had announced the scores publicly, praising Ebony's perfect score while noting that the class average was surprisingly low. She hadn't meant to excel. Math had always come easily to her, numbers making sense in a way people never did. But she'd forgotten the first rule of survival: never outshine the apex predator. "It wasn't a stunt," Ebony said, dropping to her knees to gather her books. Mason's foot came down on her chemistry textbook, pinning it to the floor. "You just what? Thought you'd show everyone how smart the little mouse is?" "That's not..." Ebony's protest died as Mason crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. This close, she could see the calculation in his eyes. Mason Clark wasn't just a dumb jock. His father sat on the school board. His mother ran the most successful real estate firm in the county. Mason understood power dynamics better than most adults. And right now, he was recalibrating the threat she posed to his carefully maintained ecosystem. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than shouting. "You're going to tank the next test. You're going to apologize to Mrs. Clark for cheating, and you're going to remember that mice stay quiet and hidden, or they get eaten by bigger animals." Ebony's hands stilled on her scattered papers. Something deep in her chest, something she'd kept carefully locked away for months, began to stir. It felt like heat, like electricity, like the moment before a storm breaks. "No," she said. The word hung in the air between them, small but solid. Mason blinked. "What?" "I said no." Ebony raised her eyes to meet his. "I won't tank the test. I didn't cheat, and I'm done being your mouse." The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan and Aaron exchanged glances over her head. In their world, people didn't say no to Mason Clark. They especially didn't say it while kneeling on the floor, surrounded and outnumbered. Mason's face went through several expressions: surprise, amusement, and finally, cold fury. He stood slowly, adjusting his Letterman jacket with deliberate precision. "Dylan," he said, not taking his eyes off Ebony. "Remember that storage room we found last week? The one with the broken lock?" Ebony's blood turned to ice. She knew the room he meant. It was in the abandoned wing of the school, scheduled for renovation next summer. No cameras. No foot traffic. No witnesses. "Mason, come on," Aaron said, shifting uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just what?" Mason rounded on him. "Let her disrespect us? Let everyone think it's okay to challenge the natural order?" He turned back to Ebony, who was still frozen on the floor. "Get up." Ebony's mind raced. She could scream, but the nearest occupied classroom was around 2 corners. She could run, but 3 athletes would catch her before she made it 10 feet. She could comply and hope they just wanted to scare her. But hope, she'd learned, was a luxury she couldn't afford. She stood slowly, leaving her books scattered on the floor. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The first rule of self-defense isn't about fighting, it's about awareness. Always know your exits. Always know your options. Always know your capabilities." "Good mouse," Mason said, mistaking her compliance for surrender. "Now walk." They formed a triangle around her. Mason in front, Dylan and Aaron flanking her sides. Other students passed by, but no one met her eyes. This was the unspoken rule at Warren High. You didn't interfere with Mason Clark's business unless you wanted to become his business. Ebony counted her steps as they walked. 43 to the end of the main hallway. A right turn. 37 more to the double doors marking the entrance to the elm wing. The construction zone beyond was wrapped in plastic sheeting and caution tape, a ghost town of half-demolished classrooms and exposed wiring. "You know," Mason said conversationally as they ducked under the tape, "I actually admired you at first. Coming to a new school senior year, keeping to yourself, not trying to social climb, but then you had to go and forget your place." They passed empty classroom after empty classroom, their footsteps echoing in the hollow space, paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. Somewhere in the darkness, a pipe dripped steadily, marking time like a metronome. "Here we are," Mason announced, stopping in front of a door marked "Storage, Authorized Personnel Only." The padlock hung open, just as he'd said. "After you." Ebony stared at the door. Once she went in there, the situation would escalate beyond anything she could explain away. But refusing would only delay the inevitable and potentially make things worse. She stepped inside. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and dust. Metal shelving units lined the walls, stacked with boxes of outdated textbooks and broken lab equipment. A single bulb cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. There was only one exit. The door slammed shut behind her. "Now," Mason said, rolling his shoulders like a boxer, preparing for a match. "Let's discuss respect." Ebony backed away until she hit the far wall. Her hands found the cold metal of the shelving unit, fingers automatically cataloging potential weapons, a broken beaker, a box of test tubes. Nothing substantial. Nothing that would even the odds against 3 athletes who outweighed her by a collective 300 pounds. "I don't want any trouble," she said, playing the part they expected. The scared girl. The mouse. It was a role she'd perfected over months of practice, and she wore it like armor, even as her mind calculated distances and angles. "Should have thought of that before you disrespected me," Mason said. Dylan and Aaron spread out, forming a semicircle that cut off any possibility of dodging past them. "You know what your problem is, Mouse? You think being smart makes you special. But out here in the real world, being smart just makes you a target." He was wrong, Ebony thought. Being smart wasn't what made her special, but he'd learn that soon enough. "Please," she whispered, letting her voice crack. "I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want." "Too late for that," Mason said. He cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking twigs. "But don't worry, we're not monsters. We're just going to teach you a lesson about staying in your lane. Nothing that'll show up in pictures. Nothing you can prove. Just a little reminder of how the world works." Ebony's father had been a Marine before he became a teacher. He'd come back from Afghanistan with medals and nightmares, with hands that could kill and a heart that couldn't forget. He'd started teaching her Krav Maga when she was 10, right after a boy at school had pushed her off the swings and broken her wrist. "I won't always be there to protect you," he'd said, wrapping her small hands for the first time. "But I can teach you to protect yourself. Remember, Em, it's not about being the strongest, it's about being the smartest fighter in the room." She trained 4 times a week for 8 years, even after the incident at her last school, even after the lawyers said it would look bad, even after her father's cancer diagnosis. She trained through grief and guilt and the crushing weight of trying to be normal. And now, backed into a corner with nowhere to run, Ebony Stone was done pretending to be prey. "Last chance," she said, her voice steady now. The trembling mouse persona fell away like a discarded coat. "Walk away. Tell everyone you scared me straight. I'll go back to being invisible, and we can all pretend this never happened." Mason paused. Something in her tone triggered long-dormant survival instincts. But teenage pride was stronger than wisdom, and he had an audience to impress. "Grab her," he ordered. Dylan moved first, reaching for her arm with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had his assumptions challenged. Ebony let him come, waiting until his fingers were inches from her wrist. Then she moved. The basic principle of Krav Maga was simple: maximum damage, minimum effort. It wasn't about fair fights or honor. It was about survival. Ebony's hands snapped out, catching Dylan's reaching arm at the wrist. She pivoted, using his momentum against him, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. With surgical precision, the air left his lungs in a whoosh. As he doubled over, she brought her knee up into his descending face. Not hard enough to break his nose, she had that much control, but hard enough to send him stumbling backward into a shelving unit. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. "What?" Aaron's curse was cut short, as Ebony flowed into her next movement. She'd learned long ago that in a multiple attacker scenario, you couldn't afford to admire your work. Movement was survival. Stillness was death. She closed the distance between them before Aaron could process what had happened to Dylan. He threw a wild haymaker, telegraphing the punch like he was starring in an action movie. Ebony ducked under it, her muscle memory taking over. Palm strike to the ribs, foot stomp to his instep. As he howled and hopped backward, she grabbed his shoulders and introduced his groin to her rising knee. Aaron collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. "Stay down," she advised, but he was already curling into a fetal position. Beyond hearing that, left Mason. He stood frozen by the door, eyes wide with shock. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. He was Mason Clark. His father owned half the commercial real estate in town. His acceptance to Princeton was already assured through generous donations. People like him didn't lose to people like her. "You're insane," he breathed. Ebony straightened, brushing dust from her jeans. "I'm trained. There's a difference. My father will destroy you. We'll sue." "For what? 3-star athletes attacking a girl half their size in an isolated location?" Ebony pulled out her phone, showing him the recording app that had been running since they'd entered the room. "I think the lawyers call that self-defense." Mason's face cycled through several colors before settling on a pale green. Behind Ebony, Dylan groaned and tried to sit up, blood streaming from his nose. Aaron hadn't moved beyond occasional whimpers. "This is impossible," Mason said. "You're nobody. You're just some scared little transfer student who eats lunch alone." "I do eat lunch alone," Ebony agreed. "By choice, because the last time I ate in a cafeteria, I hospitalized 3 boys who thought it would be funny to grab me. That lawsuit your father would file, my family's already been through one. We won. Turns out judges are pretty sympathetic when you can show a pattern of bullying and a clear case of self-defense." She stepped over Aaron's prone form. Approaching Mason with measured steps, she forced him back against the door. Suddenly, he looked very young under his Letterman jacket. "I came here for a fresh start," Ebony continued. "I dyed my hair, changed my style, kept my head down, did everything I could to avoid this exact situation. But you just couldn't leave me alone, could you?" I didn't know," Mason whispered. "Of course you didn't, because you never bothered to know anything about me beyond what you could use to hurt me. You saw quiet and mistook it for weak. You saw alone and mistook it for defenseless." She stopped just outside his reach, close enough that he could see the complete absence of fear in her eyes. "So now you know. And you have a choice. We can walk out of here and pretend this never happened. You can leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. And everyone saves face. Or," his voice cracked, "or I upload this recording. The school board finds out the president's son likes to assault girls in abandoned buildings. The football team loses 3 players right before the state championships. College scouts start asking uncomfortable questions. Mason, your choice." Mason's throat worked as he swallowed. Behind them, Dylan had managed to sit up, leaning heavily against the shelving unit. Blood had already started to crust under his nose. "You broke my nose," Dylan said, his voice thick and nasal. "No, I didn't," Ebony replied without turning around. "If I'd wanted to break it, you'd know. That's just cartilage displacement. It'll heal straight if you don't touch it." "How do you know that?" Aaron had recovered enough to speak, though he remained firmly horizontal. 8 years of training, 6 tournament championships, one very protective father who made sure I could handle myself before he— Ebony cut herself off. They didn't deserve her grief. The point is, I know exactly how much damage I did and didn't do. You'll all be fine by tomorrow. Bruised egos aside, Mason found his voice again. "If we walk out of here, if we leave you alone, you'll delete the recording." Ebony pretended to consider this. In truth, she had no intention of deleting anything. That recording was insurance. But they didn't need to know that. "If you can manage to forget I exist, I'll consider it." "Deal," Mason said immediately. Too quickly. Ebony could see him already recalculating, trying to find angles, ways to spin this in his favor. But that was tomorrow's problem. "Good. Now move." Mason scrambled away from the door. Ebony walked past him, pausing with her hand on the handle. "Oh, and Mason, that calculus test next week? I'm going to ace it. Just like I'll ace every other test. Because that's who I am. A straight-A student who happens to know 17 different ways to dislocate a shoulder." She glanced back at him. Remember that." Then she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving 3 of Warren High's most feared bullies bleeding and bewildered on a storage room floor. The walk back to the main building felt surreal. Ebony's hands shook slightly as the adrenaline began to fade, but she kept her pace steady. She'd learned to manage the post-conflict crash, to push through the chemical cocktail of fear and triumph that flooded her system after every fight. She retrieved her scattered books from where they'd fallen, noting that someone had stepped on her chemistry notebook, leaving a dirty footprint across her carefully written notes. She'd have to recopy them tonight. The normal, mundane thought felt like a lifeline back to regular reality. Students were starting to fill the hallways as the warning bell rang. Ebony joined the flow of bodies, just another face in the crowd. No one looked at her twice. No one knew that she'd just dismantled 3 predators in under a minute, and if she had her way, no one ever would. But secrets, she was learning, had a way of revealing themselves. By lunch, whispers had started to circulate. Mason, Dylan, and Aaron were notably absent from their usual table in the cafeteria. Someone claimed to have seen Dylan in the nurse's office with a bloody nose. Another swore they'd spotted Aaron limping to his car during second period. Ebony ate her sandwich in the library, pretending to read while monitoring the gossip flowing around her. She'd chosen a table in the back corner, positioned so she could see all the entrances. Old habits died hard. "Is this seat taken?" Ebony looked up to find a girl standing beside her table. She recognized her from AP Chemistry, Claire Morgan, student body vice president and general overachiever. They'd never spoken before. "No," Ebony said cautiously. Claire sat down, pulling out her own lunch with practiced efficiency. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Claire said, "I saw you earlier with Mason and his goons." Ebony's hands stilled on her sandwich. "Oh, I was in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I heard voices, recognized Mason's charming personality, and figured I should maybe get help." Claire paused. "But by the time I got back with Mr. Howard, you were gone. So were they." "We worked it out," Ebony said carefully. "Did you?" Claire unwrapped a granola bar with deliberate precision, because Dylan Ward showed up to third period looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a brick wall. And Aaron Reed supposedly pulled a groin muscle so bad he can barely walk. Ebony said nothing. And Mason Clark, who hasn't missed a day of school since freshman year, suddenly developed a stomach bug right after first period. Claire took a bite of her granola bar. "Weird coincidence." "Very weird," Ebony agreed. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Claire said, "You know, I've been waiting 4 years for someone to stand up to those jerks. I just never expected it to be the quiet new girl who apologizes when someone else bumps into her." Ebony felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "People are full of surprises, apparently." Claire leaned back in her chair. "So, what's the deal? Secret ninja training? Government experiment? Bitten by a radioactive spider? Something like that?" Ebony said, "Well, whatever it is, respect." Claire held out her fist. After a moment's hesitation, Ebony bumped it with her own. "And if you ever need backup, or just someone to eat lunch with who isn't a complete sociopath, I'm usually here." It was the first genuine offer of friendship Ebony had received since arriving at Warren. She felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "Thanks," she said. "I might take you up on that." Claire grinned. "Cool. Oh, and Ebony, you might want to check social media. Someone started a rumor that Mason got his ass kicked by a freshman girl. He's been blowing up group chats trying to deny it." Ebony pulled out her phone, scrolling through the school's unofficial Instagram page. Sure enough, the speculation was running wild. No one had the real story. But the very fact that Mason was defensive told its own tale. "This is bad," Ebony muttered. "Why? Seems like justice to me." "Because wounded pride is dangerous." Ebony had learned this lesson the hard way at her last school, And Mason Clark doesn't seem like the type to take humiliation well. As if summoned by her words, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." Ebony showed it to Claire, who frowned. "Think it's him? Who else?" Ebony deleted the message, but unease settled in her stomach like a stone. She'd hoped the threat of exposure would be enough to keep Mason in line. But she should have known better. Boys like him didn't accept defeat. They just regrouped and attacked from a different angle. "So, what's the play?" Claire asked. Ebony appreciated that she didn't suggest going to the administration. They both knew how that would go. Without concrete proof, it would be her word against his, and the Clark family's influence ran deep. "I wait," Ebony said, "and I stay ready." The rest of the day passed without incident, but Ebony could feel the shift in the air. People looked at her differently now, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, a few with what might have been admiration. The story had taken on a life of its own, growing with each retelling until some versions had her taking down 5 football players with her bare hands. She kept her head down, attended her classes, and pretended not to notice the stares. But her senses remained on high alert, cataloging exits and potential threats with the automatic precision of someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary. The final bell rang at 3:15. Ebony packed her bag methodically, waiting for the initial rush of students to clear before making her way to her locker. She'd parked in the far lot that morning, which meant a long walk across campus. Plenty of opportunity for ambush. But the parking lot was nearly empty when she reached it. Her beat-up Honda Civic sat alone in a sea of empty spaces, looking small and vulnerable under the gray November sky. Her instincts warned her. Ebony's hand went to her pocket, fingers closing around her keys. She'd modified them months ago, filing one key to a subtle point that could serve as a weapon in an emergency. Paranoid, her mother had called it. Prepared, her father would have said. She was halfway to her car when she heard the engine. A black BMW roared into the parking lot, tires squealing as it curved around to block her path. Ebony recognized it immediately. Mason's 18th birthday present, a $60,000 apology for his parents' divorce. The driver's door opened and Mason stepped out. He'd changed clothes since this morning, trading his Letterman jacket for a designer hoodie that probably cost more than Ebony's entire wardrobe. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he moved that suggested bruised ribs under the expensive fabric. He wasn't alone. 2 more cars pulled in behind him, disgorging what looked like half the varsity football team. Not Dylan or Aaron, they were probably still licking their wounds. But 6 other players, all wearing matching expressions of forced bravado. "Hello, Mouse," Mason said. His voice was steady, but Ebony could hear the rage underneath, carefully controlled, but burning hot. "Thought we should finish our conversation from this morning." Ebony shifted her stance subtly, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. Casual, open ground with nowhere to run. Her phone was in her back pocket, but she'd never get it out in time. "I thought we had an understanding," she said. "We did. But then I got to thinking." Mason stepped closer, his posse spreading out in a loose circle. "See, I can't have people thinking some nobody transfer student punked me. Bad for the image, bad for business. So, you brought backup." Ebony kept her voice level, even as her mind raced through possibilities. 7 opponents was beyond anything she'd trained for. This wasn't going to be a fight. It would be a beating. "I'm not stupid," Mason said. "I know what you can do now, but even you can't take all of us." He was right. Ebony's father had always been honest about the limitations of hand-to-hand combat. Skills could even the odds, but numbers would always win in the end. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you gone. Transfer schools. Move towns. I don't care. But you're not graduating from Warren." He pulled out his phone, showing her a video file. "See, while you were playing ninja this morning, Travis here was recording through the door crack. Shitty quality, but good enough to show you attacking 3 innocent students who just wanted to talk." Ebony's heart sank. She'd been so focused on the immediate threat, she hadn't considered accomplices. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter. My version has better lawyers. Mason pocketed his phone. So here's the new deal. You leave voluntarily, or we make your life hell until you break. And trust me, Mouse, we're very creative. The circle tightened. Ebony could see the anticipation in their faces, the mob mentality taking hold. They'd already justified whatever came next in their minds. She was the aggressor. They were just defending their friend. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Mason smiled. It was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "Then we remind you why mice don't mess with lions." The attack came from behind, just as Ebony expected. These weren't trained fighters. They were bullies who relied on size and numbers. She heard the footsteps, felt the air displacement, and was already moving when hands reached for her. She ducked under the grab, spinning to drive her elbow into her attacker's kidney. He grunted and stumbled, but before she could follow up, another set of hands seized her backpack, yanking her off balance. Ebony let the momentum carry her backward, using it to power a headbutt into someone's face. She heard cartilage crunch. That nose was definitely broken. But there were too many of them. A fist caught her ribs, a foot swept her leg. She rolled with a takedown, managed to bloody another nose on the way down, but then they were on her. The weight of multiple bodies pressed her into the asphalt. Someone's knee dug into her back. Hands pinned her arms. "Not so tough now, are you?" Mason's voice came from somewhere above her. She could hear the satisfaction in it. The relief that the natural order had been restored. Ebony tested her position. No leverage, no options. The asphalt was cold against her cheek, scattered with gravel that bit into her skin. She could taste blood where her lip had split against the ground. "Get her up," Mason ordered. Rough hands hauled her to her feet. Her arms were wrenched behind her back, held by two players whose grips felt like iron shackles. Mason stood in front of her, finally looking like the king he believed himself to be. "You know what your mistake was?" he asked. "You thought being able to fight meant you could win. But this isn't a tournament. This isn't some dojo with rules and refs. This is the real world, where money and numbers always beat technique." He was right. And Ebony hated him for it. All the training in the world couldn't overcome simple math. "So what now?" she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You beat up a girl in a parking lot. That's your big power move?" Mason's face darkened. Now you apologize. Loudly. Publicly. You admit you attacked us unprovoked. You beg for forgiveness. And then you disappear. And if I don't?" He nodded to one of the players holding her. The grip on her arm tightened, torquing her shoulder until fire shot down her nerves. Ebony bit back a gasp. "That's just the preview," Mason said. "We've got all afternoon." Ebony closed her eyes. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive. Live to fight another day. There's no shame in tactical retreat." But another voice spoke too. Her own. "From this morning, I'm done being your mouse." She opened her eyes and met Mason's gaze. "Number," he laughed. "You're not really in a position to negotiate." I said no. I won't apologize. I won't lie. And I won't disappear. Blood from her split lip tasted like copper, sharp in her mouth. But her defiance was sharper. "So do what you're going to do. But we both know you've already lost." Mason blinked. "How do you figure? Because the second you brought 6 guys to fight one girl, you admitted I beat you. Everyone will know it. The story's already spreading." Mason Clark was so scared of Ebony's stone that he needed half the football team for backup. She smiled through the pain. "That's your legacy now. Forever." Mason's face went white, then red. He drew back his fist, and Ebony braced for impact. The punch never landed. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice boomed across the parking lot like thunder. Everyone froze. Ebony craned her neck to see Coach Walker striding toward them, followed by 2 more teachers and what looked like half the girls' volleyball team. The hands holding Ebony released her immediately. The circle of football players scattered like roaches exposed to light, suddenly very interested in their phones or the surrounding scenery. "Nobody move," Coach Walker ordered. He was a mountain of a man. Ex-Army Ranger turned PE teacher. And when he used his command voice, even Mason Clark listened. Someone better start explaining. "Now, Coach, we were just—" Mason began. "Save it, Clark." The coach's eyes swept over the scene, taking in Ebony's split lip, the scattered backpacks, the guilty faces. "Morgan, you called this in?" Claire stepped out from behind the volleyball team, phone in hand. "Yes, saw them following Ebony and figured she might need backup. Got the whole thing on video, too. Ebony could have kissed her." "Everyone. My office. Now." "And if anyone's not there in 5 minutes, they're off the team permanently." The football players trudged toward the building like condemned men. Mason lingered, shooting Ebony a look of pure venom. She met it steadily, blood still dripping from her lip. "This isn't over," he mouthed. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's just beginning." Coach Walker's office smelled like leather and disappointment. Ebony sat in a plastic chair, holding an ice pack to her split lip, while chaos erupted around her. 7 football players crammed into the small space, their earlier bravado evaporating under the coach's withering glare. 20 years, Coach Walker said, his voice dangerously quiet. 20 years I've been teaching at this school. Never once have I seen such a disgusting display of cowardice. He turned his laptop around, showing Claire's video. 7 athletes against 1 girl. In my parking lot, wearing my team's colors. Mason stepped forward. "Coach, she attacked us first this morning. We have proof." "Shut your mouth, Clark." The coach's voice could have cut glass. "I've already seen your proof. Funny how your boy Travis's video doesn't show what happened before Miss Stone defended herself. But this," he gestured at the screen, "this shows everything, including you ordering an assault." The door opened, admitting Principal Franklin and Officer Julia Rhodes, the school's resource officer. Ebony's heart jumped, but Coach Walker caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Trust me," the look said. "Gentlemen," Principal Franklin began, though the word dripped with irony. "Officer Rhodes will be taking your statements individually. I've already called your parents. They're on their way." "You can't be serious," Mason protested. "My father—" "Your father is already here," Principal Franklin interrupted, "along with the school board president and 3 other board members. Turns out they take assault charges very seriously, especially when there's video evidence." The color drained from Mason's face. Through the office window, Ebony could see the parking lot filling with expensive cars. Parents in business suits emerged, faces tight with anger and embarrassment. "Miss Stone," Principal Franklin said, turning to her, "do you need medical attention?" Number just a split lip. "And this morning's incident, I understand there was an altercation in the Elm Wing?" Ebony chose her words carefully. 3 students cornered me in an isolated area. I defended myself. With martial arts training, I'm told. "Yes, 8 years of Krav Maga." The principal nodded slowly. "Officer Rhodes will need your statement as well. But given the circumstances and the video evidence, I think it's clear who the aggressors were." He looked at the football players. "All of you are suspended pending a full investigation. Get out of my sight!" They filed out like a funeral procession. Mason was the last to leave, his father's hand clamped on his shoulder like a vice. Robert Clark's face was a mask of cold fury, but not directed at Ebony. He was looking at his son like a stranger. When the office finally emptied, Coach Walker sat on the edge of his desk. "You okay, kid?" Ebony nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged. "I don't know." "Fair enough." He studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "Morgan told me you put 3 of them down this morning. That true?" "They didn't give me a choice." "No, they didn't." He was quiet for a moment. You know, I've watched Clark and his crew terrorize kids for 4 years, always knew what they were doing, but could never prove it. They were too smart, too connected. Until today. What's going to happen to them? Mason? His father's already talking about military school. The others depends on their parents and the board. But their football careers are done. I'll make sure of that. He stood. You need a ride home? Ebony shook her head. My car's still in the lot. Morgan is waiting outside. Let her drive you. You've had enough for one day. Ebony found Claire leaning against the wall in the hallway, surrounded by what looked like half the school. Word had spread at digital speed. Everyone wanted to hear the story firsthand. There she is, someone called out. The girl who took down Mason Clark. Is it true, you know, karate? I heard you broke Dylan's nose. Can you teach us? Ebony felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She'd spent months trying to be invisible, and now she was the center of a storm she'd never wanted. Back off, everyone, Claire commanded, linking her arm through Ebony's. Give her some space. Show's over. They pushed through the crowd toward the parking lot. Ebony's Honda sat where she'd left it, looking small and ordinary in the afternoon light. It was hard to believe everything had happened in the span of a single school day. Keys, Claire said, holding out her hand. Ebony handed them over without argument. Her hands were shaking too badly to drive anyway. They climbed in, and Claire navigated out of the lot, past the cluster of angry parents and administrative vehicles. So, Claire said, once they were on the main road, want to tell me why a girl with 8 years of combat training was pretending to be a mouse? Ebony stared out the window at the passing suburban landscape. Because the last time I didn't pretend, someone ended up in the hospital, and my dad ended up dead. Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'm sorry. You don't have to. No, it's okay. Ebony was surprised to find she wanted to talk about it. 3 boys at my old school decided to corner me after a basketball game. I was 15. They thought it would be funny to see what was under my uniform. She paused, remembering. My dad had always told me to hold back in training. Control was everything. But that night, I didn't hold back. Good, Claire said fiercely. One of them spent 3 weeks in the hospital, shattered orbital bone. The other 2 got off lighter, concussion, dislocated shoulder. Their families sued. Rich families, good lawyers. They painted me as a violent psychopath who'd attacked 3 innocent boys. Ebony's voice went flat. Dad spent everything on legal fees, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat during the trial. The stress triggered a heart condition we didn't know he had. He died 2 months after we won the case. Ebony swallowed. Mom blamed the training. Said if Dad hadn't taught me to fight, none of it would have happened. So when we moved here, I promised her no more fighting. No more trouble. Just keep my head down and graduate. She laughed bitterly. Lasted all of 17 days. Claire pulled into a Starbucks parking lot and parked. Listen to me. What happened to your dad wasn't your fault. Those boys attacking you wasn't your fault. And Mason Clark being a psychopath definitely wasn't your fault. I know that logically, but no buts. You defended yourself. Period. And because you did, Mason and his crew are finally facing consequences. Do you know how many kids they've hurt over the years? How many transferred schools or dropped out because of them? Claire's eyes blazed. You're not a victim, Ebony. You're a hero. Ebony's phone buzzed. She pulled it out to find dozens of Instagram notifications. Someone had posted Claire's video with the caption, David versus Goliath, Warren edition. The comments were pouring in. Holy hell! Is that Mason Clark getting owned? 7 versus 1, and they still lost. New girl is a legend. Who is she? Someone drop her at. This is better than any movie fight scene. Clark's been asking for this for years. Ebony scrolled through in disbelief. The video had already been shared hundreds of times. Her anonymous days were officially over. You're viral, Claire said, looking over her shoulder. Like, properly viral. Look, someone already made a meme. Sure enough, someone had screenshot the moment Mason's face went pale and added the caption, When you find out the mouse knows Krav Maga. Ebony's phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. Mom? Ebony Stone. What the hell happened? I just got a call from your principal saying you were assaulted in the parking lot. I'm okay, Mom. I promise. Just a split lip. I'm leaving work now. Where are you? Ebony gave her the Starbucks address and hung up. Her mother would be furious, then terrified, then probably furious again. But for the first time in months, Ebony didn't feel guilty about fighting back. Over the next hour, the story exploded across social media. Someone leaked the storage room security footage. Apparently, the broken camera had been working after all. The grainy video showed 3 football players dragging Ebony into the room, followed by them stumbling out minutes later, bloodied and dazed. Local news picked it up by evening. Viral video shows high school girl defending herself against 7 attackers. The news anchor looked directly at the camera. The incident has sparked discussions about bullying, self-defense, and accountability in our schools. Ebony watched from her living room couch, ice pack still pressed to her lip. Her mother sat beside her, having cycled through all the expected emotions and landed on a fierce protectiveness Ebony hadn't seen since her father died. I'm proud of you, her mother said quietly. Your father would be too, even though I fought you because you fought, because you stood up for yourself when no one else would. She pulled Ebony into a careful hug. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to hide who you are. That wasn't fair. Ebony's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Messages from classmates she'd never spoken to, friend requests from strangers, interview requests from news outlets. She turned it off and tossed it aside. What happens now? She asked. Now things change. The next morning, Ebony pulled into Warren High's parking lot to find it transformed. News vans lined the street. Parents clustered in groups, some holding signs demanding action against bullying. A banner hung across the main entrance. Safe schools for all students. Ebony parked in her usual spot and sat for a moment, gathering courage. She'd faced down 7 attackers yesterday. Surely she could handle being the center of attention. She stepped out of her car to immediate recognition. There she is. Ebony! Channel 7 News. Can we get a statement? Miss Stone, how does it feel to be called a hero? Ebony kept her head down and pushed through the crowd. She wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who'd gotten tired of being afraid. Inside, the hallways felt different. The usual clusters of students parted as she passed, not with fear or mockery. They looked at her with something like awe. A few offered thumbs up or quiet thank yous. At her locker, she found a pile of notes shoved through the vents. She opened one at random. Thank you for standing up to them. Mason made my freshman year hell. Seeing him finally face consequences gives me hope. Anonymous. Another. You're an inspiration. Starting self-defense classes this weekend because of you, Sarah. And another. My little brother doesn't want to skip school anymore. He says if you can face 7 bullies, he can face 1. Thank you. Jake's sister. Ebony felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't meant to inspire anyone. She just wanted to be left alone. Quite the fan club. Claire appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. Thanks. Ebony accepted the cup gratefully. Any word on what happened to Mason and the others? Oh, you haven't heard? Claire grinned. Mason is gone. Withdrawn this morning. Rumor is he's headed to some military academy in Virginia. Dylan and Aaron are suspended for the rest of the semester. The others got 2 weeks and kicked off the football team. The team must be devastated. State championships are in 3 weeks. Actually, no. Turns out a lot of players were sick of Mason's crap too. Team captain made a statement saying they'd rather lose with honor than win with bullies. Claire sipped her coffee. The culture shift is real. Ebony, you started something. Throughout the day, Ebony noticed the changes. Teachers who'd previously turned blind eyes were actively monitoring hallways. Students called out inappropriate behavior instead of ignoring it. The fear that had permeated Warren's halls was dissipating like fog in sunlight. At lunch, instead of hiding in the library, Ebony found herself at a packed table in the cafeteria. Students peppered her with questions about martial arts, about self-defense, about finding courage. She answered as best she could, still uncomfortable with the attention but recognizing its importance. "Could you teach us?" a freshman girl asked shyly. Not to hurt people, but just to feel safe. Ebony thought of her father, of the hours they'd spent in their garage dojo. He'd always said martial arts was meant to be shared. That empowerment should spread like ripples in a pond. "Yeah," she said, "I could do that." Within a week, Ebony was teaching basic self-defense in the gym after school. Coach Walker had volunteered his space and even helped design a curriculum that focused on awareness, de-escalation, and basic defensive techniques. 30 students showed up to the first session. By the third week, there were over 100. "The mouse became a lion," Claire said one afternoon, watching Ebony demonstrate a wrist release to a group of eager freshmen. "No," Ebony corrected. "The mouse was always a lion. She just finally showed her teeth." The transformation at Warren High continued throughout the semester. The administration implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies with actual enforcement. A peer mediation program was established. The culture of fear that had allowed predators like Mason Clark to thrive withered and died. On graduation day, as Ebony walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the auditorium erupted in applause. She spotted her mother in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, holding a photo of her father. Principal Franklin shook her hand. "Thank you, Miss Stone, for everything." Ebony nodded, thinking of all the students who'd found their own courage in the wake of her stand. The quiet transfer student who just wanted to be invisible had accidentally become exactly what Warren High needed, proof that one person, no matter how small or alone they seemed, could change everything. As she walked off the stage, diploma in hand, Ebony felt her father's presence. She could almost hear his voice. "I'm proud of you, Em. You protected yourself and others. That's what warriors do." The girl who'd been dragged into a storage room had emerged as a legend. But the real victory wasn't in the fight. It was in the transformation that followed. Warren High would never be the same, and neither would Ebony. The summer sun fell gently over Warren, laying warm light across the empty halls and quiet fields. Graduation had come and gone, the banners were taken down, and the buzz of the school year had dissolved into the stillness of June. For the first time in months, Ebony Stone allowed herself to breathe without waiting for footsteps behind her. She sat on the bleachers of the gym, the same space where she had spent the last weeks teaching self-defense. The mats were stacked in the corner now, the echoes of laughter and shouts fading into memory. She closed her eyes and could almost hear her father's voice again, steady, calm, instructive, reminding her to ground her stance, to trust her body, to always know her exits. But this time, she didn't need an exit. The door creaked open, and Claire Morgan walked in, 2 iced coffees in hand. "One last caffeine delivery before we both disappear into summer," she said with her usual brightness. Ebony smiled, taking the cup. "You know, you've been way better at this friendship thing than I have." "Yeah, well, you had a bit of a learning curve," Claire teased, sitting down beside her. Then her tone softened. "You changed everything here, you know, not just for yourself, for everyone." Ebony looked around the gym. Just weeks ago, it had been filled with kids from every grade. Freshmen who'd been too scared to raise their eyes in the hallway. Sophomores tired of shrinking into lockers. Juniors who'd thought silence was survival. They had come to her nervous, awkward, and left with their heads higher, their voices stronger. She shook her head. "I didn't set out to change anything. I just wanted to be left alone." "And yet," Claire said, gesturing around them, "here we are. Warren feels different, safer. I think that matters more than wanting to disappear." Ebony sipped her coffee in silence. She thought about the notes she'd found in her locker, the quiet thank yous whispered in passing, the small army of students who now walked the halls unafraid. She had never wanted to be a symbol, but symbols had a way of finding you when you least expected. Outside the gym, the muffled sound of a basketball echoed. Ebony's gaze drifted toward the court where a group of younger students were practicing. Two girls, no older than 14, were squaring off in mock self-defense stances. Their laughter rang out, but beneath it Ebony recognized the seriousness in their movements. They were practicing what she'd taught them. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud. Later that evening, Ebony walked home alone, the streets of her neighborhood glowing gold in the fading light. She carried her diploma under one arm, the edges already worn from her mother, holding it too tightly, showing it to neighbors as though it were proof of survival. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She had turned down every interview request, every news outlet, every invitation to become the face of anti-bullying. She didn't want a platform or fame. She wanted something quieter, peace, a chance to start again without shadows. At her front porch, Ebony paused. The hydrangeas her mother had planted bloomed in soft blues and pinks, their petals open to the evening air. She brushed her fingers across them before stepping inside. Her mother was in the kitchen, stirring pasta on the stove. A framed photo sat on the counter, placed carefully where Ebony couldn't miss it. Her father in uniform, smiling a smile Ebony hadn't seen in years. Her mother glanced at her, eyes soft. "He would have been proud, you know." Ebony swallowed the lump in her throat. "I hope so." "No," her mother said firmly, setting the spoon down. "I know so. You took everything he taught you and turned it into something bigger. You didn't just defend yourself. You defended this school, these kids. That's a legacy he'd understand." Ebony sat at the table, staring at the photo. For so long she had carried guilt like armor, the lawsuit, the whispers, her father's death. But tonight, in the warmth of her home, she felt that weight shift, just slightly, into something she could carry without it crushing her. The next week, Ebony stood at the edge of Warren's football field. The stadium lights were off, but the air buzzed with life. A crowd had gathered, not for a game, but for something new, community self. Defense night, the Flyers had said. Coach Walker had organized it, Claire had promoted it, and Ebony, well, Ebony was the reason anyone showed up at all. She hadn't wanted the spotlight, but when she stepped onto the field and saw students, parents, even teachers waiting expectantly, she felt a calm settle over her. They weren't here for spectacle. They were here for knowledge, for empowerment, for safety. Ebony raised her voice, strong and steady. "What we're doing tonight isn't about fighting. It's about refusing to be afraid. It's about standing together so no one has to face the world alone." Applause rippled through the crowd. She demonstrated simple techniques, how to break a wrist hold, how to use your voice to draw attention, how to trust your instincts. People followed, awkward at first, then bolder with each movement. As she watched a mother and daughter practicing side by side, Ebony felt something stir inside her. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about all of them. When the crowd finally dispersed, and the field was quiet again, Ebony lingered at the 50-yard line. The stars were out now, faint and scattered, but enough to remind her of long nights spent on this same field, running laps with her father's voice in her memory. She whispered into the dark, not sure if she was speaking to herself or to him. "I'm not afraid anymore." The wind carried the words away, but Ebony felt them settle in her chest like a vow. Warren High would remember her as the girl who fought back, the girl who changed everything. But Ebony Stone knew the truth. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a legend. She was a survivor who had decided survival wasn't enough. And in that choice, in that simple, defiant choice, she had become something more. The mouse who showed her teeth. The lion who taught others to roar. Warren would never be the same, and neither would she. The story of Ebony Stone does not end with a fight in a storage room, nor with a viral video splashed across glowing phone screens. Her story ends, if it ends at all, with the quiet knowledge that courage is not born in moments of victory, but in the simple, difficult decision to stand when every instinct tells you to hide. Ebony was never searching for fame, nor did she want to be a hero. She wanted only to survive the cruelty of a world that too often looks away when strength crushes silence. And yet, in choosing to resist, in choosing to say no when it mattered most, she became more than a survivor. She became a mirror, reflecting to every quiet, frightened voice the truth that power does not belong only to the strong, but to the steadfast. There is a lesson here for all of us. Bullying thrives in the dark corners of our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, where silence allows cruelty to grow. But Ebony's story reminds us that silence is not safety. Silence is surrender. The moment we speak, the moment we stand together, we begin to unravel the fear that binds us. Think of the students who once shrank from Mason Clark in the hallways of Warren High. When one girl chose to fight back, not with vengeance, but with the will to endure, others found their own voices. The culture shifted. The shadows receded. A single act of defiance sparked a chain of courage that reached further than Ebony could have imagined. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. Change rarely arrives in thunderclaps. It begins in whispers, in the small choices we make every day to defend ourselves and those who cannot yet defend themselves. To walk into danger not seeking glory, but seeking dignity. To say, I will not be your mouse. Now, as you sit with Ebony's story, ask yourself, where in your own life do the shadows gather? Where does silence allow injustice to grow? And what might happen if you, like Ebony, found the strength to speak, to act, to stand? Because stories are not meant only to be read, they are meant to ignite something in us, to push us from the safety of the audience into the arena of our own lives. If Ebony's story stirred you, if it lit even the smallest spark of recognition or resolve, then carry that spark forward. Share it. Speak about it. Reflect in the comments what this journey means to you, because stories, like courage, grow stronger when they are carried together. And if you want more tales like this, raw, unflinching, and true to the human spirit, join our community. Subscribe to Raw Black Stories, not for entertainment alone, but to keep alive the conversations that matter, about courage, resilience, justice, and the power we each hold to change the spaces we inhabit. Ebony's fight reminds us. It is not the absence of fear that makes us brave. It is the choice to stand in spite of it. And maybe, just maybe, her story is not hers alone. Maybe it belongs to all of us, waiting for the moment we decide to roar.